Front Sight Training article number 8. Let's assume that you were facing an armed adversary who was intent on killing you or your loved one. You try everything possible to avoid the gunfight, but your adversary leaves you no choice. In the end, you were forced to draw your weapon and shoot. What is your goal in shooting? What are you trying to accomplish? Oftentimes we hear words like kill, incapacitate, and neutralize. I certainly understand all of those concepts, however the goal is to stop. You're simply trying to stop the aggressive behavior the bad guy is displaying towards you or your loved one. Let's say you fired a controlled pair to the center of your adversary's thoracic cavity and the aggressive behavior doesn't stop. In other words, he continues to fight. This is what we call a failure to stop. You can see the logic in the name. A failure to stop may be caused by any number of things, including body armor, drugs, or a highly dedicated opponent. Body armor is very common and readily available. A good example of body armor being used in a gunfight is the Bank of America robbery in North Hollywood back in February 1997. Those guys were covered from head to toe in not one but 2 layers of body armor. Then there are drugs. Drugs are even more common than body armor and frankly probably just as effective at causing a failure to stop. Drugs affect a person's physiology. Your adversary may bleed out in 30 seconds to 3 minutes, but in the meantime, you have a failure to stop. Next is the dedicated opponent. He has no body armor and no drugs other than adrenaline. He's just a very stout individual and he's simply not impressed with the caliber of your weapon. He is focused and determined, and being shot with a handgun doesn't stop him. A good example of this was the Miami FBI shooting in April of 1986. One of the bad guys in the shooting continued to fight even after sustaining a serious wound in the opening volley. He took a round to the arm. It shattered the humerus bone, severed the brachial artery, and went into the thoracic cavity, through one lung and stopped just short of the aorta. This is about as much penetration as you can ever hope for from a handgun. But he was determined to continue the fight, and fight he did. He was bleeding so profusely that investigators were later able to track his movements by the arterial spurts of blood on the pavement. This guy was bleeding out in a hurry. But for the next several minutes, he tore the place up. He killed 2 FBI agents and wounded 5 more before he expired. Ultimately, you don't care what caused the failure to stop. Your only concern now is finding a solution. There are several options. More of the same, that is, additional rounds to the thoracic cavity, rounds to the pelvis, or rounds to the central nervous system. More rounds to the body armor or more rounds to the drug-crazed individual aren't going to do anything except waste time and ammunition, neither of which you have enough of in a gunfight. So more of the same is not a reliable solution. The pelvic shot comes from law enforcement as a means of stopping somebody armed with a contact weapon like a knife or a baseball bat. If he's all the way across the room and closing the distance on you with a Louisville slugger and you shatter his pelvis, you have stopped him. However, what if he's armed with a gun? The trigger finger is not connected to the pelvis. What's more, handgun rounds generally don't shatter the pelvis. Typically, they just bore a little hole clean through it. So if more of the same and the pelvis are poor choices, what does that leave? It leaves the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. If you sever that spinal cord, you inhibit all the electrical impulses from that point down, and he will pile up like a wet rag. But that is an incredibly difficult shot. I certainly couldn't guarantee that shot. I don't think anybody could, especially under stress. That leaves us with the brain. Not the head, but the brain. There's a whole lot of head that isn't brain. The best access to the brain is the cranial ocular cavity. The cranial ocular cavity is essentially the eye sockets and the soft honeycomb tissue of the sinuses. In other words, your aim point is essentially the eyes and nose. If you drive a handgun round through a bad guy's cranial-ocular cavity, he will definitely stop. In fact, he is very likely to die. Remember, it was his decision to start the fight. You delivered a controlled pair to the thoracic cavity. It was his decision to continue the fight, forcing you into the cranial-ocular cavity shot. He made all the decisions in this fight, not you. It is always unfortunate when someone dies, but better him than you or your loved one. Think of it this way, you are shooting at the cranial-ocular cavity not to take a life, but rather to save a life. How are you going to deliver that shot? The cranial-ocular cavity is a very small target compared to the thoracic cavity. This is a difficult shot and will require the 3 secrets. But that's a discussion for a later date. Stay tuned. Go to www.frontsight.com to subscribe to our free gun training reports. Go to www.frontsight.tv to watch informative and entertaining original Front Sight TV shows.